Good evening and welcome to Patricia, Mystical Insights. I have a fabulous guest for you tonight. His name is Dr. David Ackerman. I love having David on. This is his second time on the show because he does so many different things. And he will be talking about a certain type, a certain way in to, that is kind of the map or the blueprint or the plan to find out, you know, like where to go in on this person. Let's say he has a patient with him and he wants to know, how do I approach this person? He has so many different techniques and so many different modes and methods and modalities that he can really find the shortcut in and help heal this person. Now, of course, we all heal ourselves from our divine innate self. The God self within is the healer, and we all have that ability deep within us. So we are facilitators. Those of us who do healing are facilitators of the healing process within you. Now, there are different types of healers. There are people who do hands-on healing, and really what that means is putting your hands on, or a healer will put their hands on your body or above the body, and maybe the Holy Spirit moves through, maybe the person's guides or angels or ascended masters or who knows who. But the energy is transferred into the body, and what happens is the energy, as the energy moves through, the heavy density moves on out, and the body becomes clear by having this new light energy in the cells and in the tissues, and the mass moves away. So by having someone put hands on your body, you really do benefit. I had my feet work done today by my friend, and she was doing reflexology on my feet while we were just kind of sitting on the sofa, and I felt so much better. I got up after BG worked on me, and I just thought, oh gosh, I've got circulation in my legs now. And she was just pinching different points, you know, like squeezing my toes and the arch of my foot and my ankles, and it felt so good. And I felt rejuvenated once she worked on my feet. Now, of course, the feet, that's one method, that's reflexology. So there's acupuncture, there are so many different types of healing that it would take all night to mention them. And we are now moving into a time where people are looking for other ways to get well. So what this show offers, and what Dr. Ackerman tonight will talk to you about, is his way of doing this. Now, I can tell you that I've been to David before, and he's very, very good. So I encourage you to listen very closely to what he has to say, because he's going to get into some material tonight that's very, very specific, and it'll teach you something that you haven't heard on this show before. It's new information for you. So I'm going to conclude my talk right now, and David, welcome.
Thank you, Patricia.
It's so good to have you back again.
It's good to be back.
Oh, you've been studying with Barbara Brennan now for what, 4 years?
Just completed 4 years of training. Some of the influences in her life were something called the path work.
Yes.
And the path work was 360 lectures channeled by a woman named Eva Brock.
Mm-hmm.
Eva Brock was born in Austria and came to New York in the 50s. So back in the 1950s, she was channeling this material, and it's a beautiful psycho-spiritual process, the path work.
Mm-hmm. I've got one of the books.
There was a psychiatrist named John Parakos, who was a student of Wilhelm Reich.
Yes.
Wilhelm Reich was the psychiatrist who had studied under Freud, and then sort of broke away from Freud and saw life more in terms of energy, rather than, well, Freud's work was so much based on sex. Reich saw life energy as being the same as that energy. Wilhelm Reich wrote many books. One was called Character Analysis. And one of the things I'll be talking about tonight were the 5 character types that he actually originally developed.
And what do you mean by character types?
What happens is, when a child or an infant is born, the infant's energy is wide open. There's no block to the energy flow, and so the infant will cry when it has needs, and
they're not really protected like we are. Right. So they're just open. Their aura is wide open.
Exactly.
Okay. So they're raw. Okay.
And these 5 character types are based on when that infant or child first gets so wounded that they say, this wound is too painful, I can't feel it, I'm going to block my energy flow. I'm going to defend and put up armoring.
Right.
That stage in child development where that first happens determines which of the 5 character types are going to be predominant in that person. Armoring is a block, an energetic block in the energy field that, like I said, instead of the energy flowing and being open,
like a net, or
yeah, it could be like a mesh armor, or a net. Sometimes massage therapists or rolfers, the armoring can be stored in the tissues too. It starts out as a defense against a pain, but it eventually becomes stored in the tissues, and that can be worked through. The blocked energy prevents you from feeling those painful sensations or emotions.
So our first crisis, it starts to develop a certain personality type or character type?
Yeah, depending on the age.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
In child development, they talk about different aspects of development, and so where that wound is when the baby first decides this is too painful, I'm going to block my energy, determines the character type. So Wilhelm Reich had some students, other psychiatrists, Alexander Lowen, who developed bioenergetics, which is physical exercises that can be done to work through the armoring and release the frozen emotions.
Yes.
And John Parakos was another student, and he wound up marrying Eva Brock, the channel who brought in the pathwork.
Yes.
And so her influence on bioenergetics, that spiritual influence, allowed Dr. Parakos to develop what he called core energetics.
I took a course in that.
Yeah, the core being the spiritual essence.
Right.
And so all of us have this perfect spiritual core, the creative spark that's uniquely us.
Right.
But it gets covered over when we first have this wound.
Yes.
And then the armoring is a type of defense. And then the child may learn at a very early age also to develop a mask. The mask is when the child learns to get the love of their parents, because parents aren't perfect, they don't have totally unconditional love, that the child may have to stop some of their behavior. They might have to stop some of their lower self natural energy. We all know that children are capable of being cruel to each other. Their emotions are right there, whether it be anger or hatred. But then the next second they can forget about it and they're not still influenced by it.
Yeah, they're not attached to it.
But they learn that if I get angry, I'm going to lose my parents' or my teacher's approval. And so they start to have a mask. So on the inside they're angry, but they know not to show that. And there's 3 main kinds of masks. There's the mask of serenity. So when you're really angry and you don't want to show that, then you have a mask of serenity where you're pure calm. There's the mask of power, where if you're really very fearful, instead of showing the fear, you go into the opposite. Yeah, like a James Dean.
Get puffed up.
Yeah, and that's the mask of power. And then there's a mask of love, where if you're not really feeling that, and yet that's what you show as a mask.
We get confused because we can feel rage inside of somebody, and they may look just as serene as can be, or this person may be saying, I love you, but really they hate your guts. And so we get confused because of the messages that we're getting at a subtle level.
And by understanding these different parts of ourself, the core, higher self, lower self, wound, mask and defense, you can do a lot of work on yourself and work through those issues. So each of the 5 character types are a response to that initial wound, and it's not so critical what the wound is as the age that you block the energy.
So are you saying that there are 5 different character types, and that you can tell by the person's body, the way their body is put together, what age they experienced trauma?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
The reason that the body shape will correspond with the character type is because in the aura, in the different levels of the energy field, it's an as above, so below effect. The higher aspects of the energy field would be like your belief systems, and then the first level of the energy field is the etheric body.
Right.
And the etheric body has, it's like a matrix or a mold for the physical body.
And it's real close to the body.
Right. This is what acupuncture works on, is the etheric body. And it's sometimes described, in a healthy person, it's a blue color. If you're not as healthy, it might be a blue-gray. And it comes about 1.5 inches out from the body. It's responsible, for example, in phantom limb pain, where somebody's been amputated and yet they still feel pain in the hand. It's because the etheric field
doesn't know that the
carries the sensations, pleasure and pain. And so the wound and the response to it affects the etheric field, which is the matrix for the physical, and that's why the different body types will help interpret that.
I want to hear more about the characters. I'm real interested in that.
Okay, so we're going to go through the 5 in the order that they would develop from birth through childhood.
Good.
The first one, and you have to understand the names for these 5 types.
They're scary.
Yeah, they're old Freudian terms that describe different mental illnesses that we're familiar with.
Yeah.
So when you hear these terms,
the first thing you wanted to say is, oh,
they don't,
I'm a what?
they don't refer to what you're familiar to them sounding like.
Right, yeah.
You have to understand it goes back to Freud and descriptions of mental illness.
And now all the names are different.
The reality is all of us have a certain percentage of all 5 in our makeup. And when we label ourselves, it's sort of like in astrology. If you label yourself off one sign, that's not a full description of who you are. And so we might say, well, this person is primarily this. They might only be 40% that one, and 15 and 20% of the other 4. But it's a useful tool, and it really doesn't describe who we are. It describes who we're not. In other words, we're born as a perfect divine being. We're light and love, and this is a description of our defense, our response to being wounded and not being able to remain in an undefended state. A very high spiritual state is undefended, and that's kind of our goal.
Because the armor's broken down, it's gone, we don't need it anymore.
Right.
Because we know who we are.
Like Jesus was, totally undefended.
Yeah.
And that's really our goal in ascension or enlightenment, is to get to this undefended place. So understanding how we defend ourselves is the first step in getting there. So if someone, let's say they're getting ready to incarnate, and they're all excited because they're going to bring spirit down into matter and come down to earth, and they're just all excited about it, and then they're born and it's a very traumatic birth experience. Maybe the mother has to be drugged, or it's the cords wrapped around their neck. If there's either a very traumatic birth experience or a mother who maybe is hostile or is ill after the birth, then that develops the first character type, which is called schizoid. And the terror that occurs at childbirth...
Now that's different from schizophrenic.
Right.
Okay.
When you hear these terms, don't associate them with what you think.
Don't go weird on the names.
Yeah. All normal people are these types. So the schizoid character type, there's a certain terror in their eyes, and terror is the main theme in their life. And when they're born in that traumatic experience, they go from being all excited about bringing spirit into matter to, ooh, I made a mistake. I don't really want to be here.
Let me back out.
And so energetically, they tend to leave their body. They'll come out through the crown or 7th chakra and kind of come out into the side.
Okay, and hang out of the body.
Right. So as children, they may be daydreamers or bookworms, and they find ways to not fully be in their body. And then as adults, they make very good meditators because they're so used to leaving the body. And so they might go from a very mental, intellectual place in childhood or teenage years to a spiritual place. and it's very easy for them.
Okay.
Their real challenge, though, is to want to be here, to be fully incarnated in their bodies. The body type is very often tall and thin, and they tend to have scoliosis because...
Which means a curved spine?
Yeah, they may have some curvature of the spine because energetically, as they leave the body, they typically spiral out that crown chakra into the side.
So the energy pulls the bones to the side.
Right.
Wow.
That's what we're saying. This etheric body is going to determine the physical structure.
Yeah.
You know, and I want to mention here, we're not neglecting genetics. There's certainly genetics is playing a role in our body type, and yet, if you look a little further, I believe that when a soul picks its parents, it's picking parents who will create an environment and a body that mirrors
who they are.
Yeah, mirrors their wound or their issue that they came into this life to heal.
Clear. The pattern.
Right. So sometimes if there's abuse in childhood, it's because they need to heal the response to that abuse.
So they can grow out of being a victim.
Right. So whatever their most painful wound is, it's reenacted.
Right.
With the hope that they'll...
Lifetime after lifetime after lifetime.
With the hope that they'll heal it.
Right.
That's the soul's hope, is by reenacting the wound, this time they'll heal it.
Right.
A similar thing happens very often when we pick a mate. We'll pick a mate that will wound us in a similar way to our opposite sex parent.
Right.
And
absolutely.
Once again, the soul wants to heal that issue.
Yeah.
So, yes, genetics plays a role, but possibly all of that's tied together.
Sure.
It's sort of that paradox of how the spiritual and the physical coexist.
Yes.
So the schizoid, they would really benefit from things like Tai Chi or grounding exercises. And that's sort of their goal, to fully incarnate and bring the light into matter, which is what they yearn to do in the first place.
To be here on the planet.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the next type.
The next type is called oral, and the schizoid and oral have some similar patterns to them.
And I would think oral, when you think oral, somebody who eats a lot or always has something in their mouth.
It's named that because of the breastfeeding stage.
Okay.
So on a purely psychological level, if the infant doesn't get breastfed, or even if they are breastfed, if the breast is pulled away before the baby's done feeding, then it creates this feeling of not having enough.
Okay.
So the oral type, perhaps in a past life, was a leader of a tribe that died in a famine, or they themselves may have starved to death. And they'll have a situation where their chakras aren't good at getting energy from the universal energy field around us.
So they can't draw in energy correctly.
Right,
okay.
Right, and it's sort of like their bodies don't metabolize energy. And so they learn at an early age to either hook and connect cords from the third chakra to mom or someone else to get energy. And the oral type, you know, they do this unconsciously and subconsciously, but...
They suck energy from you, from people.
Right. So they very often...
The psychic vampires.
Yeah, they're very often tired, don't feel like they have enough energy. Their body types are thin like the schizoid, but not as tall, and they tend to be a little sunken in the chest.
Okay.
It's sort of caved in the chest.
Okay.
They may talk a lot, and then when you're around them, you feel drained or irritated. They may talk very soft, so you have to lean forward to hear them. And then with the eye contact, they have these like vacuum. So what the oral person really needs to do is to learn to ground and connect to the earth to get their energy, and almost like lift themselves up by their own bootstraps.
Right.
And they tend to be passive and maybe feel victimized.
You're describing my mother to a T.
They may be tend to be like the hypochondriac, and so that would occur, you know, anywhere from 1 month to maybe 8 months of age if they get wounded in that stage of development.
Okay, so schizoid was the birth
birth
experience.
to 1 month.
And then the oral is 18 months?
No, more like anywhere from 1 month to about 8 months.
Oh, okay. Real early.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so the third type.
The third type is called masochistic, and that starts at 18 months to 2.5 years.
Okay.
And that's where, up until that point, the infant is sort of merged with mom. It doesn't even realize that there's
it's a self?
And and others. It doesn't have a self-identity. It and mom and the universe are just one thing.
Okay.
And so we refer to the terrible twos when the infant has to develop its own identity.
Okay.
So if, let's say, at 18 months, the infant's starting to do that, and the mother is very smothering or controlling, maybe very controlling with eating, always feeding the baby, even when it's done.
Right.
It forces the baby to eat more, or with toilet training habits.
Right.
Or maybe finishes the sentences for the baby. Maybe it's just starting to talk, and if it stutters, the mom says the words.
Oh.
Or even something like when the baby does its first drawings. You know, maybe it's 2.5 years old and starting to draw, and the mother would say, "Oh, look what my child did. This is a house, and this is," and they sort of rob
the child of their piece of art.
Yeah, they rob the essence, their own creativity and identity.
Okay.
The typical masochist is going to have very thick legs, and they're either muscular and thick or heavy.
Okay.
And that's a response to covering up the wound of having that core essence robbed.
Wow.
And so they feel like their essence is robbed, and they tuck it way down inside, and they build a little fortress around it. And the energy is very charged. In other words, a masochistic character type, there's a lot of charge or energy to their field. And it's weak on the inside and stronger on the outside.
You can feel their presence.
Okay. Usually, yeah.
Okay.
And in a past life, they may have been a slave or a prisoner. And the masochist will tend to feel like they're controlled by others. And the way that they heal themselves is by asserting for their own freedom. And what happens is the way we all create our own realities is through something called transference or projection.
I know what that is. Can you tell the viewers?
Yeah. What happens is rarely are we ever actually spontaneous. We react to whatever is happening in our lives or around us because the subconscious goes back in the past and looks through its memory banks for something familiar.
Right.
So
to associate with.
Yeah, you might meet a stranger on the street, and this is all unconscious, but maybe the stranger has a large nose, and your subconscious goes, "Oh, my Uncle Ernie had a large nose. Uncle Ernie was a jerk," and you decide this guy is a jerk without even knowing them.
Right.
You're transferring Uncle Ernie onto them, or projecting.
Right.
This is a well-known concept in psychology, and all psychiatrists or psychologists study very much so that they understand, like, for example, the woman client may treat the psychiatrist like it's their father. They're transferring their father onto the psychiatrist.
Right.
And there's even a term for the psychiatrist if he transfers his issues onto the client.
That's right.
If the psychiatrist started treating or feeling like unconsciously the client was its daughter,
they
call
countering.
that counter-transference. Right, they call it counter-transference.
You bet.
And
then you get a real interesting relationship there when both are transferring onto each other.
So transference is when we take like someone from our past and put them on someone in the present.
Is everybody with us here? Yeah, cool. I'm asking the audience just to make sure you guys are all with us here. It's interesting stuff, isn't it? Okay, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay.
So another term that's used is projection. And projection is taking something from our past and then putting it on the present. So I like to use an analogy. You know, science will explain to us that when we see something, light is coming from the object and into our eye, and the brain interprets it. projection, I like to describe it in terms of like a movie projector.
Projector.
So one of the ways we actually create our own reality is if you could think of what's out there, we create our own perception of reality. What's out there, it's like the light is coming out my eye and going out there, like the movie projector projecting the light, creating my perception of reality.
Right. So we put our image over certain people's faces until that happens in relationships a lot, until we finally get to know who the person is, which usually takes 1.5 to 2 years, and then we think they've changed when in fact the mask has come off.
Right. And in relationships, typically the transference is from the opposite sex parent.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's tied into healing that wound. Right. So with the masochist, because they feel like they were controlled, they project onto the world and all other people that they're trying to control me.
Right.
So to the masochist, everybody out there is trying to control them, and it's because they're projecting that belief on there.
And so people are saying, okay, you're a masochist.
They're going to attract
there you go,
that.
you're a masochist.
Yeah, they'll
I'll
wind
abuse
up.
you.
Exactly. And you know, you may then pick a mate where that whole scenario will be acted out again.
Unless you heal.
Right.
Or until it's healed. Yeah. So 4. Was that 4?
That was the third. The
Okay,
masochist
4.
was the third. And the fourth character type is called displaced or psychopathic. Once again, it's just the term. It has nothing to do with
and that's me.
a mental illness.
Okay.
And the psychopathic character type has an issue of betrayal. So the classical example is someone in a past life was a king, and they were a great king, they were good to their people, and they had to go off and fight a war for their country, and they left their right-hand man with the queen while they went off and fought the battle, and they win, and they come back from war.
And that dirty rat had an affair with my wife, the queen.
So they find out the right-hand man was with the queen, and then the right-hand man stabs the king in the back. You know, major betrayal issue.
Right.
So the displaced or psychopathic character type needs to learn trust. The hardest thing for them to do is trust. And even truthfulness is difficult for them. And this wound will typically happen from 3 to 6 years. And it's typically similar to the Oedipus or electric complexes. So an Oedipus complex is
the relationship to the parent of the
the male
sex.
child. The male infant child is attracted to mom and is jealous of dad having interaction. And if it's the female child with the father, they call it the electric complex. So very often the psychopathic character type feels betrayed by the opposite sex parent. And that betrayal may be when, let's say, the little boy realizes, oh, mom's not just for me, she's going to go with dad. She's going to be on dad's side and feels totally betrayed. And what happens, very often the psychopathic character type is kind of good at attacking. And so when they feel like they're betrayed, you know, you don't want to get in their way. They can really attack, and they'll use these energetic hooks and do something called a mental grasp and hook type of attack. When they do feel betrayed. And it's also called a displaced character type because their energy field, their aura, is very big on the upper half and very small on the bottom. And it's part of this power and will display that they do. And they're not very grounded, and the aura is small at the bottom. So typically, they'll have a body type that's very thin from the waist down, and then large in the upper body.
Like this.
Right. So sometimes you'll see men with these toothpick legs, and then large bellies or upper bodies, or women with thin legs and then larger breasts. And that's called the psychopathic character type. And it's because the energy field is shaped that way. So they also need to learn to ground well, to bring the energy down the lower part of the body, to control their emotions to a certain extent. and they would project out onto the world and others that they're being betrayed, and create those. So a lot of times in relationships that'll happen.
Okay.
The final of the 5 types is called rigid, and if you want, you can think of, the British nationality are very thought of as rigid. Yes. Very proper. Right.
Yes.
So the rigid type develops later in life. So these, they somehow got through infancy and early childhood without being wounded that bad.
Wow.
And what the wound is for the rigid is their parents loved them only conditionally, and they loved them for looking good or achieving a lot.
Wow.
So they feel sort of inauthentic because they learned to get mom or dad's love
by what they accomplished.
And it has to be through, maybe if it's a boy, it's doing good in sports. And if it's a girl, maybe it's having her hair perfect, and maybe she becomes a cheerleader.
So perfectionism is one
exactly.
of the character
The rigid
traits.
will have perfectionism.
Wow. Okay.
And they typically do well in school. They go on to have successful careers. They're the last of the 5 types to ever go to therapy because society says there's nothing wrong with them. They tend to have very good posture and very strong, well-proportioned bodies. So society says there's nothing wrong with these people,
they're
right?
Fine. Oh.
But they develop that mask very strong, okay? And it's sort of a facade, and they had to work very hard to get that love, and they feel inauthentic. So their core, like the masochist, their core essence is sort of way deep inside, and they don't feel it. They don't feel their own creative spark.
Yeah.
And eventually, it might be a midlife crisis. They start to feel that inauthenticity. And what the rigid needs to do is they need to connect their heart, their love, with their sexuality. So very often, they're very good at getting dates. A man might have a lot of notches in his belt, but they fail at long-term relationships.
Wow. Because they can't keep the love and the sex together.
Correct, and because of feeling inauthentic themselves, they're just presenting that facade.
Okay.
And very often a rigid would get in relationship with another rigid, so there's no one really there.
So they're both competing to be more perfect, huh?
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of work.
Yeah, so that's the task for the rigid, is to recognize their own creative spark and core essence, be okay with who they are just for who they are, and then to connect the heart and their sexuality.
That's wonderful. Whoa, he couldn't wait to get up here. Okay.
I'm Dwayne.
Well, maybe turn around, Dwayne. Okay, and turn around again. Okay. Dwayne's physical body doesn't fit into any one of those categories really neatly.
Wow.
I suspect there's a little bit of that. So he's probably quite a mix. I suspect there's a little bit of that oral type. We can maybe face that way, Dwayne.
Okay.
And it's because it's a little bit sunken in here in the chest. And that little, sometimes people have like a concavity there. That might be a little bit of an oral type, so that there might be a little neediness there, or nothing's ever quite enough for him.
And what age was the oral? Oh, that was from 1 to 8 months, or birth to 8 months?
Yeah, pretty
much.
much.
Something happened in there.
The bottom line is my mother said the head injury was at 10 months.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. He had a brain injury.
Lifetime brain injury, 10 months.
Oh, wow.
So definitely a real traumatic physical injury like that would cause a shutdown of the energy. Yeah, and it would also create a situation where you'd be very dependent on others and not be able to get your needs met for yourself. So that's kind of the key to the oral wound, is they're unable to get their own needs met, and certainly a brain-injured 10-month-old is going to become more dependent and not be able to move on to those other
like
stages.
The other kids.
Now maybe also, so yes, the wound would be at that oral stage, but then also what might be a little bit in your body is a small amount of that masochistic too. So then you weren't able to separate from mom as we move on to 18 months or 2 years. Dwayne, it wouldn't have been possible for you to create a separate identity and move away from mom, because she would be smothering you, feeling like you're totally dependent on her. And so there is some thickness to the body, and that may be a little tinge of masochism there as well.
Yeah, because I didn't speak again until I was 3 years old.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. Wow.
And so that gives a little perspective of that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing. One of the things, because we're evaluating the physical body to make the character type, it usually works best, ideally, to evaluate the way the body was when someone was in their 20s.
Oh.
And I was real thin when I was younger, and that was one of my questions for him, was at the age of... Yeah, I am. But about the age of 30 is when I started.
Right. So you can't really accurately do this for a child because their body's still growing and developing.
They haven't developed yet.
And our bodies all change as we get older. And some of that change may reflect the change in who we are. And maybe we've healed some of our issues. But very often, to know the real original character type, it's more valuable to know that.
I was too thin.
Oh, too thin.
I weighed 98 pounds at 20.
Okay.
And it was this high.
So what's that, the rigid, or is that the...
Well, no, the real thin is either going to be the schizoid or the oral.
Okay.
So the way you distinguish, the schizoid's typically taller, and their body's kind of disjointed, and maybe a head tilt, where the oral's the more sunken in.
I had the head tilt.
So what does she have?
Okay, so there may have been a
head tilt,
schizoid influence then. Were you very tired too, or did you have a lot of energy?
No, I was tired.
Yeah, if you're tired at a young age, it could be that oral component too. Now, if we look at your body the way it is now, if you want to face the camera, this would be more of the masochistic character type. No. Just the heavier body, the thickness.
And I do see the tilt. There's a tilt in her aura.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see the energy does kind of go off that way, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, the schizoid might have trouble with their upper neck as a result.
Oh, okay, I just saw that. So, now I know what I see in people's auras when I see a lot of the energy shooting off to one side or the other.
See, what Barbara Brennan did, because she was clairvoyant, she saw these auras.
Yeah,
and then when she learned of the character types, she could see the 5 character types.
Yeah, because I see that in the energy. It's like, why is this person's aura sitting off to the left or to the right?
So her first book was called Hands of Light, and she elaborated on that. Her second book was called Light Emerging, and what she did was she talked about, if you take 2 different character types, like you take a schizoid and a psychopathic and put them in a room together, how their auras interact. How they defend against each other, because she could see all that. And so in her second book, Light Emerging, it's fascinating learning how different character types defend when confronted by another character type. Looking at your body, my guess would be that you may have some of that psychopathic character type. You're very large through your shoulders and chest, and relatively maybe thinner legs. So there could be the issues of betrayal, and you carry a lot of power with you. There may also be a little bit of what's called the rigid character type. In terms of, were you very muscular when you were young? Yeah. So there may also be that rigid type where there's a strong physical body and a lot of value on athleticism and accomplishing a lot. So your body type would be one of those two for sure.
Thanks, Joe. We are down to about 3 minutes of the show.
I'd like to maybe summarize with the character types.
Okay.
So one of the faults of the rigid type might be pride.
Oh, okay.
And we talked about the healing they need to do is connecting their heart and their sexuality.
Right.
With the psychopathic person, they need to learn trust.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a tendency for not being real truthful, and a tendency to attack other people.
Okay.
With the masochist, they need to assert for their own freedom. And they tend to do a thing, a lot of masochists are passive-aggressive.
Okay.
And so
passive-aggressive.
They have a lot of energy, and they won't directly attack like the psychopath. They need to have a reason to do it.
Okay.
So in a relationship, the masochist may provoke their partner, do these subtle passive things to make the partner really angry.
And then it's their fault.
And then it's their fault, and then when the partner's angry, then the masochist will do one of two things. They'll either say, oh, here's a chance for me to vent my anger, and they can vent their anger, or they'll do something called silent obvious brooding.
Right.
Where they'll put out this really negative, sad energy. Like if you're at a party, they'd be standing off in a corner, just miserable with self-pity.
Yeah.
Or they'd go to wash the dishes, and instead of washing the dishes in 15 minutes, they'd take a half hour.
Right. So that somebody will come in and see what they're doing.
All right.
We're out of time. You're going to have to come back. That's all there is to it.